How's this? Is this good? Okay. Again, it looks like everybody's in their assigned seats here at church. But if you want to move forward into the splash zone, I will be using the screen the whole time. So I'll be referring to things on the screen. So if you want to get closer, you can. But if you prefer to stay where you are, you're allowed to do that as well.
You do know the age of the crowd. We're farsighted.
Okay. I'm just letting people know. Give everyone a chance to make their own decisions, make their own choices. How are we doing over here? I'll talk, I'll fill the space. Okay, so you can just call me Bryan. That's the name my parents gave me. That's the name my neighbors call me, and I ask my students and my colleagues and my friends call me Bryan. You do not need to put the doctor in front. Just put Bryan, and I'll know who you're talking to.
Hi, Bryan.
Great, awesome, appreciate that. So this is my favorite thing to do. I have two daughters. I have a 3- and a 6-year-old, and right now they are hopefully being little cherubs and listening to their mother and doing bath and putting their pajamas on and going to sleep without a fuss. But she's in charge of that, and I'm here tonight, and this is my favorite thing to talk about because I love talking about families. I love talking about Abraham, so I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this for months, so we're finally here. If you can look up here on the screen, these are Mesopotamian artworks depicting the tree of life. This is how they showed the tree of life. Little tree in the middle with little tiny flowers, rosettes around it. And these two Mesopotamian artworks would have been around the time when Abraham was alive. So Abraham would have seen these and recognized this as the tree of life. So we're trying to reach back in time to connect with Abraham's family tree. We obviously cannot interact with him directly, but through the book of Genesis, hopefully most people are familiar with that book, there's this beautiful story of Abraham's family. So tonight we're going to run through that family to learn about what's going on with that family and ask some questions about that family, like how did this family resolve conflict? How did this family handle anxiety? Who were the heroes? Who were the villains? What was going on in this family? So we can learn a little bit more about this family. I'm a family therapist, so I love working with families. We're not going to be judging this family. We're just going to be noticing the patterns in this family. So I am 43 years old. I can move around pretty well. Like was said before, I flew from Ontario to Seattle to Pasco, then drove all the way here. I'm glad to be moving around. I had some great food over at Becky's house. Thank you so much for providing that for me. I feel nourished and refreshed, and Ron was there too. Apparently he did some of the seasoning with the soup. So I'm ready to go. We're going to be focusing on Abraham's family. When it comes to family therapy, when I was learning about family therapy, I remember sitting in a dark room, looking through a one-way mirror, observing a family with a counselor. So we would watch what was happening in the family, and we would talk about this to try and figure out what were the patterns in this family, how could we understand this family better. We're doing the same thing tonight through the one-way mirror of time to observe what was happening in Abraham's family. Because cycles are repeated from one generation to the next. Behavior patterns are passed down like a precious family heirloom from one generation to the next, and then passed down to the next generation. So we can see a lot of patterned behavior in Abraham's family clearly present in the biblical narrative. And if trauma can be inherited from one generation to the next, then so can love, emotional intelligence, and wisdom. There are a lot of amazing moments in Abraham's family. But tonight, we're going to look at some of the patterns that were challenging for this family. So normally when we look at the book of Genesis, we look at the character of God and how he reached down and he remade his covenant over and over with humanity. So it's clear the book of Genesis is about the Savior God, the Creator God, the God who creates his covenant and keeps his covenant with humanity. But I want you to suspend some of the theological viewpoints you typically have about the story of Abraham just for maybe 90 minutes. So we can look at the story of Abraham, then I promise you we will come back and have some theological reflections. Every behavior is a symptom of the system. We are patterned individuals. When we get up in the morning, we usually follow a routine. Our day usually has some sort of flow or rhythm to it. How we respond to anxiety. When someone makes us upset, what do we do when we need to provide comfort or coping? We are patterned individuals, and every behavior is a symptom of that system. And if we can understand the system, the cluster of behaviors, A leading to B leading to C, or how 2 or 3 different things are related, we have a much better understanding about why one person is behaving in a particular manner. Now up here are some gummy bears. So this is a typical family tree. We are showing that there's a red gummy bear on the top left and a yellow gummy bear on the top left right, and they have 2 children that are half red, half yellow, and maybe one of them partners with a greenish, a lime green gummy bear, and then they have 3 children. So we can see how there's biological relationships between people when they partner together and have children. Most of us are aware of this sort of thing. I'm going to use something called a genogram, and it's slightly different from a family tree. A genogram is not just interested in biological relationships, it's more interested in how people are relating to one another, how they are getting along or not getting along. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is try and learn how to read a genogram. Are we okay with that? Because if we can learn how to read a genogram, then we can use this tool to help us track some of the family behaviors in the story of Abraham. So this is our first genogram. On the top left, we'll start up there. Squares indicate someone who is male. Circles indicate someone who is female. On the top left, we have someone named Thornton, and there's an X through Thornton. That means at this time, Thornton has passed away. At the very bottom, there's someone named Dahlia. Dahlia is the person who has created this genogram. She has talked with her parents and her aunts and her uncles and her cousins to find out information about people in the family, about when they were born, who is related to whom, who's the parents of whom, who the siblings are, and most importantly, how they got along. So this is all from Dahlia's perspective. So when Dahlia created this genogram, Thornton had passed away. Thornton, if you follow this line, Thornton was partnered with Becca, and they have 3 children. We have the eldest on the left, and we move in chronological order as we move to the right. Tyson is a male, and he's alive at the time of this genogram. James has passed away. There's an X through him. And then Christy is also alive, so there are 3 children. And notice how James has partnered with someone named Roxy. Are we following so far? How are we doing? Okay, great. They've had 2 children, Jeff and Trisha. Jeff has partnered with Sophia, and Jeff and Sophia had 2 children, Dahlia and Philip. And Dahlia was the person who created this genogram, so everything is from her perspective. If Philip made this genogram, or if Jeff made the genogram, or Sophia made the genogram, there might be some slight differences in regard to their perspective about how people got along. Raise your hand if you had a sibling when you grew up. Okay, great. So you and your sibling or siblings may have grown up in the same house, but you didn't grow up in the same family, meaning you experienced the family differently. I'm guessing if you talk with your siblings and you ask questions about their experience regarding certain rituals like Christmas, or how we got together for Thanksgiving, or who is the favorite, or who got the prioritized treatment, you and your siblings might have different perspectives of what's happening. That's because even though we grew up in the same geological, physical space, we have different emotional experiences and perceptions about what's going on because of personality or birth order, et cetera, et cetera. Up here at the very top middle, we have Gladys, who has passed away, and she is partnered with someone. We do not know this person's name. When Dolly was creating this genogram, we did not have information about who the biological father of Roxy was. So the biological father, we don't know his name. There's these double hash marks, which means this biological father and Gladys, they had a divorce at the time of this genogram. They've had 1 daughter, Roxy. On the top right-hand side, we have Ricky, who's passed away. Catalina is alive. And we have twins, Roberto and Martin. Notice these are twins because they come from the same little point right here. So a little triangle is made that indicates these 2 people were born at the exact same time. Roberto and Karina had 3 children, Sophia, Emily, and Damien. Damien and Lily were partnered, then they got divorced, and they had 1 daughter, Bernice. Okay, how do we feel about reading this genogram so far? Any questions about this? No questions? Okay. A couple of things I want to point out. Not every family has some of these individuals, but it might be important for you to understand in case you see a genogram in the wild, to understand what these different symbols mean. Over here we have James and Roxy had 2 children, Jeff and Trisha. Trisha, there's a triangle in the middle of Trisha.
Where are you?
The very middle of the screen, we have James and Roxy. We have Trisha and Hannah in the very middle of the screen. Trisha has a triangle in the middle, so if someone identifies as gay or lesbian, they would put a triangle in the middle. And so Trisha partnered with Hannah, and they had a daughter, Julie, maybe through IVF or surrogacy, I'm not sure. And then over here we have Sophia, Emily, and Darian. Notice Emily, there's a square and then a circle around Emily. That means this person was born male and transitioned to female. Now, not everybody has people like this in their family, and some families may not be okay with this sort of thing, but if you see this in the wild, a genogram, and you wonder what those symbols are, I'm just explaining what those symbols are. Okay, now we go to the difficult part, this. Okay, let's just go back. Everybody take a deep breath. All right, we're going to understand what's going on here. This is why we're doing all this work, to look at this genogram, to look at the relational lines, to see how people interacted with one another. We're going to go to the legend on the bottom left. So 2 parallel green lines means a close relationship. They're very close. This is a good, healthy relationship. They're just best buddies. 3 parallel lines means it's a fused relationship. They're enmeshed. They're in each other's business in a non-healthy way. They're always sharing drama. They're always sharing anxiety. There's a lot of conflict between them, but that they're really, really close, but in an unhealthy way. If you see a jagged red line, this means there's conflict between people. If you see a jagged blue line with an arrow, that means some sort of abuse. Could be physical, psychological, sexual abuse, or all 3. If you see a dotted gray line, that means emotional distance. And if you see a dotted red line with some hash marks in the middle, this means emotional cutoff, as in if we both get invited to the same Thanksgiving dinner and I see you there, I'm either not going to talk with you or I'm going to turn around and leave because I don't want to be in your presence. I have this emotional cutoff. Sometimes that happens in our families, right? Okay, let's start to apply this to the genogram. On the top left, we have Thornton, who has an emotional cutoff with Becca. Becca is also emotional cutoff from Tyson, James, but she has a fused relationship with her daughter, Christy. How are we feeling about this so far? Feeling okay? Okay. Let's go over here to the middle. Gladys perpetrated some abuse towards Roxy, and Roxy's a source of a lot of drama in this family. Look at this. Very top middle, we have Roxy, who perpetrated abuse towards her, looks like her sister-in-law, Christy, towards her biological son, Jeff, towards her biological daughter, Trisha. There's also a lot of conflict between Roxy and other people in the family. And some people might say, Roxy is a problem, right? She just stirs up drama. We don't want to be around Roxy. On the top right, we see Ricky and Catalina. They had a close relationship, and they had twins, and these 2 twins were close. It looks like Roberto, the oldest twin by maybe a few minutes or a few hours, had a close relationship with his middle child, and Karina had a close relationship with the youngest child. There's some conflict between Sophia and Emily and Damien, so between these 3 children there's some conflict. Looking over here, it looks like Jeff has a really close relationship with Philip and a close relationship with his father-in-law, but he's emotionally distant from his biological father. Jeff is emotionally distant from his partner, Sophia, from his wife, Sophia, and Sophia has a very close relationship with Dahlia, and there's conflict between Dahlia and her younger brother, Philip. All right. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on in our families as well, right? A lot of complexity, some unresolved tension in our families, perhaps. Does anyone want to perhaps come with some sort of reasoning or possible scenario why certain things might be showing up in this way? Why people might be close or distant, why they may be emotionally cut off, or why there's conflict? Any hypothetical stories about why this family is the way that it is? Yeah, just make something up.
Well, usually there's expectations.
Ooh, expectations. This is good.
Fulfilling the other's expectations, then there's problems.
Good. I love this. So somebody has an expectation, and other people are not meeting those expectations, but maybe one person in the family is meeting that expectation. So all of a sudden, because you're meeting my expectations, we're close. But other people are not meeting my expectations, so there's some distance between us. Awesome. Good. Excellent. What are some other reasons why some of these things might show up in our families? And we have a roaming mic we can use from now on, moving forward. Okay, I'll ask some specific questions. Oh, there's a hand here.
Emotional disconnect between the mom and the dad at the very beginning.
Okay, say it to the microphone so we can all hear it.
Emotional disconnect between the mom and the dad at the top.
At the very top. Okay, good.
And so you have so the mom has put her interest into the daughter and emotional disconnect to the two sons.
Good. Everybody hear that? So on the top left, there's emotional cutoff between Thornton and Becca. And Becca's also cut herself off from the other two males in the family, the two sons, but she's really close with her daughter, right? Then this sort of repeated later on, the next generation. James has some emotional cutoff from his daughter Trisha, and he's distant from his biological son Jeff. Maybe because he didn't experience a lot of warmth and comfort. And whatever we learn in our family, we usually repeat that unless we make some sort of change. So maybe they passed on this emotional distance because I'm used to this distance, then this is just how families are. I'm going to continue with my next family of procreation, my family of choice, and there's going to be some natural distance because that's what I'm used to. A lot of people don't get along with Roxy, right? But maybe Roxy right here in the middle, so she was the victim of some sort of abuse, and oh, has anyone ever been in a hot tub when it's cold outside? There's a big temperature difference, right? Between the cold air and the hot water, right? And if you go from cold air and you dip your hand or your toe or your foot into the hot water, it might feel a little bit spicy, right? Because of the big temperature difference. Sometimes people grow up in a family where the temperature, the emotional temperature of the family, is cold. And when you meet someone who shares warmth and openness and safety, that warmth and openness and safety might feel spicy to you because you're not used to it. So there's a chance that Roxy in the very middle, because maybe she was handed a playbook of how to respond to people, and in that playbook, it was told her, you're the victim of abuse, and the way to maintain relationships is to have conflict. And she might be trying to keep distance between her and other people in the family, because if she gets too close to them, it feels a little uncomfortable for her. So she's trying to keep people at arm's length, maintain distance, keeping conflict alive so that she does not have to deal with some of the vulnerability necessary to engage in a close relationship, because maybe she doesn't know what safety feels like, and it feels uncomfortable for her. So she's trying to just use the playbook that was handed to her by her biological mother. Okay, any questions about this before I move on? I see no hands, so I'll take that as a sign between you and me that I should move forward. All right, here we go. I will be talking about stress and anxiety interchangeably tonight because they show up in our body in the same manner. Physiologically, we experience stress and anxiety in a similar way. But there is a specific distinction between stress and anxiety. When we are stressed, we know what we are stressed about. I'm stressed because I have to pay rent at the end of the month. I'm stressed because April 15 is tomorrow and I have to do my taxes. Right? I'm stressed about the election. I'm stressed because someone's coming to visit and I don't know how the visit's going to go. So I know exactly what I'm stressed about. When I'm anxious, I can't put my finger on it. I'm just feeling uncomfortable and anxious. I don't necessarily know why. So stress and anxiety manifest themselves in a very similar manner in our body physiologically. And we pass on stress and anxiety from person to person like a hot potato. We pass it to the other person passes the next person, as we have a lot of hot potatoes passing around this church in our families, and we get used to being brokers of hot potatoes. Experiencing stress, passing on stress, because anxiety and stress are contagious. So if someone nearby is experiencing a powerful emotion that's kind of unpleasant, we start to sense some of that within this emotional field. We start to feel uncomfortable. We start to feel also irritated, and we don't like that. So maybe we try and distance ourselves from that person, or we tell them to stop it because we don't like what's going on, and all of that is because we're catching their anxiety. So anxiety can be passed from person to person. So tonight we'll be asking some questions about Abraham's family. What were some of Abraham's family rules? What was it like to be in his family? What were some of the patterns that were passed down from generation to generation? How do they handle anxiety and tension? How did this family experience prejudice and discrimination? Who are the villains and who are the heroes? Because in the previous slide, Roxy's the villain, right? She's the source of a lot of drama. It's really easy to write her off as a villain. But every behavior is a symptom of the system. So we're going to relook at who villains are in Abraham's family, and maybe there's a chance we'll see Roxy in a different light. All right, anyone know off the top of their head, what story does Abraham's story begin? In what chapter in the book of Genesis? Anyone know? I hear 9, a little higher. 11. I think I heard 11. 11 is when the story starts. When God calls Abraham in chapter 12, that's often where Christians start the story. God calling out to Abraham and calling him to the wild, wild west of Canaan. But the story of Abraham actually starts a little bit earlier. And this is how the story starts. Oh, look at this little genogram we're starting, right? Here's Abram and Sarai. Later on, their names will change, and hopefully I will say their names correctly until they change, but I might slip up a little bit. So they are partnered, they are married, and they have no children, right? How the story starts. In fact, in Genesis 11:31, it says Sarai was barren, she had no child. The narrator, when starting the story, says, this is the baseline for this family. She is barren, she has no children. So before we learn that Sarai is beautiful, we learn that she is barren. Before we learn that she is actually Abram's half-sister, we learn that she cannot have children. This is the starting point. This is how the story begins. And this is one of the main drivers, the main challenge that this family faces in multiple generations. Now, here in America, we have several different dates that are significant infertility or barrenness dates. Right now, we are in October, and October 15 is National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. This is a challenging day for individuals who experience miscarriages or experience infertility, because we're remembering the losses we've experienced. My 2 daughters, who are 3 and 6 years old, both of them came through IVF, which is like a modern-day miracle. At one point in time, these 2 little babies, these beautiful girls, were frozen embryos, frozen in a freezer, and they were thawed out and transferred to my wife, and she was able to carry both of these babies to have 2 take-home babies. But my 3 and 6-year-old, both of them came after some losses in our family. So these 2 babies are called rainbow babies. They came like this, the rainbow after the storm, rainbow after a loss. So in this family of Abraham, even though the word miscarriage is never used in the book of Genesis, it's clear that barrenness is, right? So it's not too far of a stretch to wonder whether or not this family experienced these similar losses. Infertility is a disease or condition of the reproductive system, often diagnosed after a couple has had 1 year of unprotected well-timed intercourse, or if the woman has suffered from multiple miscarriages and the woman is under 35 years of age. If the woman is over 35 years old, it is diagnosed after 6 months of unprotected well-timed intercourse. Currently, 1 in 8 couples have trouble getting pregnant or sustaining pregnancy, and 1 in 4 women will experience a miscarriage in their lifetime. When this story began, Abram was 75, Sarah was 65, and yes, maybe they lived longer back then, but if you cut this in half, we're looking at 30, 35 years old. So at this point in time when the story started, they're experiencing some infertility. And barrenness in the ancient Near East has some similarities to infertility we experience now in the Western world. There's some stigma around it. There's some shame. There's some expectations about what is supposed to happen naturally, biologically in a family. And just because you want to have children does not mean you automatically get to have children, right? There's this journey that's part of this process. It's not like going to McDonald's and ordering something. You don't always get what you order. And for both ancient Near East and the Western world, this is painful and traumatic. Back then in the ancient Near East, if you want to have 2 children or 5 children, plan for 10 or 12 or 15 children, because you may not be able to keep all of those. Nowadays, if you have IVF and you want to have a child, ask your infertility doctor and maybe transfer 2 embryos, because you don't have any certainty that both those embryos are going to be viable. So back then and now, we have real questions about, wow, how do people get pregnant? How do they sustain that pregnancy? So there are big questions back then and now. Now here's the call of Abraham. Knowing that the family starts out with this infertility journey, listen to what God says to Abraham as he lures him, as he calls him the wild, wild west of Canaan. He says, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so shall you be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in all of the families of the earth will be blessed." The two big themes here in the call of Abraham are family and land. God is talking to Abraham about a family and a land, repeated over and over and over. And this is actually very similar to what happens previously in Genesis. If you remember the story of Adam and Eve, and they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and God comes to them, and he talks to them about the consequences of this sin, and listen to what he says to Adam and listen to what he says to Eve in Genesis 3. He says to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to the dust you shall return." So God is talking about the land here. And I used to think that God was talking to Adam and saying, you know what? You're going to have tough work ahead. Sore lower back, blisters on your hands, sore shoulders. You're going to have to work really hard to get food. But I don't think that's the pain God is talking about. What is the real pain of trying to grow food and it producing thorns and thistles instead? You trying to grow food, but not enough food is grown, right? You're short on resources. You're short on food. You do not have enough food to eat. There's a famine, right? That's the real pain. When you're trying to produce food, but the earth is not producing the food like you want it to. Famine is one of the big drivers in this family. Every single generation in Abraham's family struggled with famine. What do we have to do with famine? The other challenge this family faced? God says to Eve, he says, to the woman, he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." So I am male, I will never give birth to a child. So I need to be careful here, right? I'm not trying to mansplain what's happening, because I've never given birth. I will never do that. I will never get an epidural. But talking with my wife and other people, yes, we know that the birth of a child is one of the most dangerous situations for women, right? It's very scary. It can be very dangerous. And it can be very painful, especially if you don't have epidurals to help you with that. But that pain, it can be traumatic. It can come, and you can remember it. But one of the real pains when you're trying to have children is when you're trying to have children and you're not producing children. So when Mother Earth is not producing food and when mothers are not producing children, God is saying this is going to be the consequence of sin. You're going to experience both these things. And now God, when he calls Abraham in chapter 12, he's saying family and land. He's trying to promise these things to this family because this family struggles with both of those in all 4 generations. Here we are, a little update on the genogram. We know that Abram marries his half-sister Sarai, and he has some brothers, and Nahor actually marries his niece over here. Back in that time, normally people would marry into clans, into their families. That was normal. So here's kind of a redistribution of this family. So we have Abram partner with Sarai, Nahor partner with Milcah, and then Haran with his partner, and then Lot down here in the corner. How are we doing reading this genogram so far? Are we okay? I'm seeing some yes, and seeing some of this, and we're going to move on. Okay. So here's a map of the ancient Near East, and on the right-hand side we have Mesopotamia, and we have the Tigris and Euphrates River, and we have Babylon, and the city of Ur on the bottom. Ur is where we get the root word for urban or suburban, because Ur was this major city. It was a major cosmopolitan city, and because it was right near the Tigris and Euphrates River, there was a lot of irrigation, which means there was abundant crop, barley, wheat, other sorts of grains. So because they had excess grains, they were able to export a lot of those grains to get other goods. This was a very wealthy, luxurious, cosmopolitan city. They had running water in the city. Even some buildings had their own running water. It's not just a central well, but some water was aqueduct and piped into specific buildings and specific rooms, specific houses. This was a major cultural area with lots of artwork. I showed you at the very beginning some artwork from Mesopotamia from Ur. Raise your hand if you like checking your email. Okay, well, a few people checking. Okay, not everyone likes email. Well, if you don't like these, you can blame the Mesopotamians because they started the cuneiform writing. You can blame all this on them. If you've ever heard of the phrase, I don't want to recreate the wheel, it's because they created the wheel. They were the originators of this idea. And up here in the top right-hand corner, I circled this little area with some dotted lines. In this area, this is northeastern Iraq and present-day Iraq. There are some tablets called the Nuzi tablets that were unearthed, some archaeological tablets, way back during the time of Abraham and Sarah, and we're going to talk about these later on. And these Nuzi tablets gave some directions about what to do with families, how do we interact with one another, and what do we do when families experience infertility. There are some laws and suggestions about what families do when they experience infertility. And in this story, Abraham is called by God. So he goes up to Paddan-aram up north, to Haran, and then God calls him and Sarai down to the wild, wild west of Canaan. And the wild, wild west of Canaan, they were living a Bedouin lifestyle in tents in the desert. We're not talking running water, right? We're not talking creature comforts. It's a very different living situation than the cosmopolitan city of Ur. These are pictures, archaeological pictures, of some of the infrastructure in the city of Ur. Look at these big pipes. These were for sewage. Not only did they have running water, they had a way to get rid of the waste inside of the city. Very different from the wild, wild west, where you dig your own hole, right? A different situation here. So their story was actually their infertility story. And God is trying to promise, I will promise you a family, I'll promise you a place. All right, who was Abram and Sarai's first son? Anyone know? Who was their first son? Okay, I hear Isaac. Any other options? Ishmael. Anyone else? Yeah, I agree with you. What if there's a third son? Did you know they had a son before Isaac and Ishmael? It's in the Bible. Let's look at this. The narrator is making it super clear what's happening in this family. So after God calls Abram, Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions, set out for the land of Canaan. Later on, Genesis 12, Abraham and Sarah and Lot experience a famine. They have to go down to Egypt, and this is where Abram says to his wife, hey, can you please tell them that you're my sister, not my wife, because I'm worried about my own well-being. I don't want someone to treat me unfairly because I'm a foreigner. I don't want to be prejudiced against. I don't want to be discriminated against. Can you please just say you're not my wife? So we know that Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's harem, and then Pharaoh found out, and he was upset, and he ended up giving Abraham and Sarai maidservants, manservants, donkeys, cattle, etc., and sent them back up north out of Egypt. And when they left Egypt, the narrator says, so Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, and he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. So the narrator is saying, Lot is part of this family. In the book of Genesis, the word adoption is not used. It's used in other parts, but not in the book of Genesis. And the narrator is trying to make it very clear, Lot is part of this family, because Lot's father has passed away. And back then, we did not have the foster care system or orphanages. People accept and take these children who've lost their parents into their family. That's what's happening here. So the first son of Abram and Sarai was actually adopted. His name was Lot. So we have Lot, who's here, is adopted. If you want to make your own genogram at home, you would show the biological parents and then the dotted line from his adopted parents. So Lot is adopted by Abram and Sarai. Genesis 13 and 14, we hear that Abram cares a lot for Lot. In fact, there's some conflict between Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds, and he says, look, there's conflict here. How about you choose? Where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the lush valley of Sodom and Gomorrah or somewhere else? And Lot chooses the lush valley of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham takes the leftovers. And in Genesis 14, Abram rescues Lot. If you remember the story, there are 4 big kings with their professional armies from the east, and they come in to Sodom and Gomorrah and they say, you need to pay us tribute. And the leaders of Sodom and Gomorrah say, we're not going to pay you tribute. So these 4 kings with their professional armies come, they take everybody captive, and they start marching them out of town. And Abraham and his little posse of men chase after them, these professional armies, to rescue Lot and the people. He's really interested in risking his own life to save and preserve Lot. Later on, Abraham bargains with God for Lot's life, right? Abraham is very interested in preserving Lot. Genesis 15, Abraham talks to God and he says, "O Lord, what will you give me since I am still childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "Since you have given me no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir." So even though he adopted Lot, Abraham is still saying, "God, you promised me children, but where's the promise? What's going on here? We've been waiting. We came here because we were expecting children." So then Sarai has this idea. How about we take this maidservant, Hagar, who we picked up down in Egypt, and we have her become part of the family as a surrogate to have a child. If you remember the story, Sarai has this idea. Then Abram and Hagar sleep together. Hagar gets pregnant. Sarai mistreats Hagar, and Hagar runs away. Are we familiar with the story? Yeah? Okay, good. And raise your hand if you've heard this story framed in such a way, saying that Sarai was unfaithful because she had this idea to have someone come and help bring a child into the family, but this was not God's original plan. Have we heard this before? Like, if she would just been a little more patient, a little more faithful, a little more trustworthy, this whole Ishmael debacle wouldn't have happened, right? Yeah. It's really easy to blame her for all these ideas, right? 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 As if this was her unique idea, as if she was the first person in the world to think of this. She was not the first person in the world to think of this. So the question is, was Sarah unfaithful, or was she trying to use the in vitro fertilization, the IVF of the day? They didn't have the science to help, so instead they had surrogates to help this. In fact, the other generations as well, Rebecca had a nurse, maidservant, come with her, and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah also both had Zilpah and Bilhah join. So the other generations also had someone come to help them. Why? I'm getting some goosebumps. Because we know that infertility can be a challenge. So having a maidservant to be a surrogate was a normal practice during this point in time. So we know that Ishmael is the biological son of Hagar, right? And Isaac is the biological son of Sarai, right? We make this big distinction between the son of promise, which is Isaac, and then the son of Hagar. We make a really big distinction who the biological mothers are. Can anyone with brave certainty tell me who the biological mother of Issachar was? Or Zebulun? Or Gad? Or Asher? Anyone know who the biological mother was? Why don't we make as big of a deal who the biological mother was when it comes to the children of Israel, but we make a really big distinction here, as if Ishmael is not as important as Isaac. But then later on, when it comes to Israel, Rebecca and Leah, oh, these are just all the sons of Israel. These Nuzi tablets, which would have been around during the time when Abraham was alive, there are about 4,000 different tablets, cuneiform tablets that look like this, and they have specific marriage and fertility laws. And here's what they say about families that experience infertility. 1, a wife can give her slave girl as a surrogate to her husband to obtain an offspring. So these are the rules back then, socially accepted rules. But if you do this, there are 2 other things you must also do. And here are the 2 other things. This child must be treated as her own. Did Sarai like Ishmael? No. In fact, Sarai is not present at the birth of Ishmael. Even though this was her idea, she was not at the birth, and she wanted nothing to do with Ishmael, right? Here's the second thing. If later on a couple gets a full biological son, then the first child can't be expelled from the family. in Abraham's family, with Sarai, was Ishmael expelled from the family? Yes. So Sarai, and by extension also Abraham, because he went along with it, right? Were not following these rules. They wanted the first part, but they didn't want to deal with the second part. And because of those decisions, this rift in the family between Isaac and Ishmael is still felt today, right? On our geopolitical framework, right? On this stage, the tension between these two families. It would have been different had Ishmael been treated as her son, and had they not expelled Ishmael from the family, right? Very different repercussions nowadays, thousands of years into the future. Also, the father had a right to name any of his sons his heir, regardless of birth order. So Abraham would have come from a culture, these were the standards. He could do this. Okay, so if you want to later on down the line, you can look at the 12 sons of Israel. So Gad and Asher and Zebulun, you can see who the biological mothers are. I just wanted to point out that we don't make as big of a distinction later on in the story, but we do make a big distinction with Ishmael and Isaac. All right, so Hagar is running away from her mistreatment. She's running down to Egypt. God stops her at the well and says, hey, go back because your son will also be blessed. Go back to Sarai. So she goes back. She has a child, Ishmael. Sarah is not present. She does not want to be any part of this baby, even though this was her original idea, but she does not want to be part of this. There are name changes. So now we have Abraham and Sarah, not just Abram and Sarai. In Genesis 18, there's laughing at God. Sarah is laughing at God because God says that you will have a biological child, and Sarah thinks there's no way this is going to happen. She starts laughing. And Isaac means laughing, which I guess most of you know. So the word laughter is Isaac. And this is also when Abraham starts to bargain with God for Lot. What if there are 50? What if there are 40, 30, 20? Suppose only 10 people, righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, will you still destroy the city? Because Abraham is trying to do everything he can, even bargaining with the divine, to save Lot. And we know that Abraham is not a morning person. Did you know this? He is not a morning person. In fact, there are only 3 times in Genesis where Abraham gets up early in the morning. And the narrator is trying to point something out to us. Here's the last time, the 3rd time Abraham gets up early in the morning. It's in Genesis 22, the binding of Isaac. Abraham is about to take Isaac up to Mount Moriah to potentially sacrifice him. He's having faith in God, but he's taking his son, the son of promise, up to the mountain to sacrifice. And Abraham rose, look at the red verbs here. Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. The narrator is slowing down the story, and we see this great patriarch who has lots of servants to help him, but he's doing the manual labor. This means something to him, and he's getting up early in the morning to do this because this might be the last time that he sees his son Isaac in camp with him. The 2nd time Abraham gets up early in the morning, Genesis 21. So Abraham rose early in the morning, see the same patterns, and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and finally gave her the boy, his son, and sent her away to die in the desert. This might be the last time he sees his son Ishmael, right? The first time Abraham got up early in the morning, Genesis 19. This is after Abraham is bargained with God, after Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. So Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, where he had bargained with God. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looked toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. This might be the last time he sees his son, his adopted son Lot. So it's clear that Abraham cared about Lot, Ishmael, and Isaac. Genesis 20, there's another famine, and Abraham and Sarah have to go up to be with the Philistines, and they're with King Abimelech. And he says the same thing to his wife, hey, I think they're going to mistreat me. They might discriminate against me. Can you please pretend to be my sister, not my wife? Right? The same sort of thing happens. She's taken to the king's harem. He's worried about his own well-being, his own skin. He's sacrificing his wife and what's going to happen to her so he can save his own skin. And then in Genesis 20, verse 17, Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maid so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. See, everybody is interested in having children in the story. This is one of the main struggles that not just the story of Abraham, but people surrounding Abraham are also wanting to have children. In fact, Lot's daughters are so desperate, we know what happens in that story, right? People are very interested in having children. Genesis 21, Isaac is finally here, the son of promise. Sarah is 90 years old. Abraham is 100 years old. They waited 25 years after God called them. That's a long time to wait for children when you start at 65, right? Long time to wait. Isaac is here. Ishmael ends up teasing Isaac. King Isaac is what the Hebrew says. And Sarai says, no more of this. You out of here. Sends Hagar and Ishmael off into the desert. And I wonder if part of this is because Hagar was Egyptian. That means Ishmael was half Egyptian. Maybe she didn't feel too comfortable with that because she's from Mesopotamia. Right? There's some cultural differences there. Maybe they look different. I don't know. So there's this big rift in this family between Ishmael and Isaac. Genesis 22, after the binding of Isaac, the narrator tries to introduce us to a whole bunch of different names. Basically, this is a genogram. The narrator is giving us a genogram. In the middle of the genogram is this new person named Rebecca. This is important because Rebecca is going to become the new matriarch of the family. Because in Genesis 23, so here's Rebecca, the narrator has given us this beautiful little genogram so we can follow how Rebecca is related to everybody else. In Genesis 23, Sarah dies. She dies at the age of 127, and Abraham mourns for her. And there's something that's pretty interesting about this story. Let's look at the flow of the narrative. At the end of Genesis 22, Abraham comes down the mountain with his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived in Beersheba. So where did Abraham live? Beersheba, good. Let's hold on to that. Then the narrator says, back at the ranch, there's this person named Rebecca. Now let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. The next thing that happened is Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, the land of Canaan. So Sarah died in Hebron, and where did Abraham live? Beersheba. Two different places. What's happening here? A couple things could be happening. One, the narrator is just moving on in time, right? There's stuff going on. The narrator does not have time to tell us every single little place they lived, right? They're moving around a lot. They live a Bedouin lifestyle, so they move around quite a bit. So, I mean, we're not going to say where they lived in the month of July versus October versus January. We don't have time for that. There's more important things to get to in the story, right? So that's one explanation. But what's interesting about this story is in Genesis 23, Abraham always refers to Sarah as my dead, never my wife. Only the narrator calls her his wife. And there's a distance between Hebron and Beersheba. Here's the distance right here. Most of the time, the family is down here in Gerar, Beersheba. They only come to Hebron on their way in and when Sarah passes away. They're about 26.4 miles away. So what does that mean for us? Let's look at a map that we can be more comfortable with. So on the right-hand side, we have Beersheba and Hebron, the top right. It's kind of small, but here's 26.57 miles. Here's Lewiston SDA Church. And here, way up here, this is the Troy SDA Church. So Abraham is living at the Lewiston Seventh-day Adventist Church, but Sarah passes away at Troy SDA Church. Why is there so much distance between them? I don't think they were divorced, but I'm thinking about the story of Sarah and how she was treated by Abraham, right? Leaving this luxurious cosmopolitan city of Ur, going to Padamaran, going to the wild, wild west. Twice, not once, but twice, her husband tried to pawn her off to be part of the leader's harem to protect his own skin. There's no mention of Abraham ever talking to Sarah about going up to Mount Moriah with Isaac to sacrifice him. In fact, after that story, we don't hear any other word from Sarah. She's silent. I wonder if there is some emotional distance between them, represented by the physical distance, right? In fact, when you look at the story, when Abraham went up, Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that's Hebron, and Abraham came in to mourn for Sarah and weep for her. This Hebrew word could also mean Abraham came up to mourn for Sarah. So we don't know if he's going in to mourn for her or if he's coming up from Beersheba to mourn with her. And sometimes the language can have two meanings. Later on, Genesis 24, Sarah's passed away, and Abraham says, wow, I need a wife for Isaac. So he calls his favorite servant over, hey, can you please go on a quest? Go on a quest to find a wife, a suitable wife, for my son Isaac. So the servant goes off, he goes up to Haran, and he sees this person at the well, Rebekah. There's the watering of the camels, etc., etc. And then he brings Rebekah back home. Genesis 24, then Isaac brought her, that's Rebekah, into his mother Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Genesis 25, Abraham has more offspring, but he ends up sending those children west because he wants to make sure that this area of Canaan is preserved for Isaac. And Isaac really only has one chapter to himself as the main patriarch. Other than that, he's kind of a supportive character, not a main character. He never leaves Canaan. He's more passive. Some people call him weak or milquetoast. So the question is, was Isaac weak? Was he passive? Or was he just bookended by two major characters? Big Abraham and then big Jacob, who is renamed Israel, right? And remember how we talked about before, whoever you grow up in the same house with doesn't mean you grow up in the same family, because who you're compared against changes how people see you. On this left-hand side, we have three Hollywood superstars. They have big shoulders, big arms. Here's Mark Wahlberg, look at those shoulders. Here's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, look at those big arms. Here's Anthony Mackie. They look like big dudes, big dudes. But look at how small they look next to really big people. These big dudes are right here in the middle. This one on the left is next to Charles Barkley, and this on the right, this is Shaquille O'Neal, one of the biggest centers in NBA history. Look how small they look. Looks like they came to borrow some milk money from their parents. To see if I can borrow the keys to the car, Dad. Look how small they look standing next to these really big people. Here's another picture. This is DK Metcalf, a wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. He's like 6'2", 230, 2% body fat, all muscle. He's a big boy. But look at the next picture, and as he's next to Dikembe Mutombo. He's wearing his hat. He just took off his bike helmet. He came to say hello, see if he could borrow $5. He looks like a little kid, right? Who you stand next to changes the way people see you. And Isaac doesn't have very long to shine. In fact, one of the biggest stories about Isaac is him being tricked by one of his children, Jacob, right? That's one of the big stories about Isaac. So it's not necessarily that Isaac was a bad person or not big. In fact, there's one chapter he does some amazing things. Isaac knows how to dig wells. He knows how to plant crops, which tells us he can live the city folk life as well as the nomad life. He can do both of those things. And people were in the Philistines and the Canaanites were intimidated by him and wanted him out of their area because he was so big and powerful. Get away from me. They did not feel comfortable with him. So he was a big person in his own right, just not as big as Abraham and not as amazing as Jacob, right? Okay. Abraham dies, and we know that Ishmael lives in defiance of all of his relatives. Genesis 25, there's more infertility. Isaac is the only patriarch to pray to God on behalf of his wife. No other patriarch prays to God. They talk to God, but he prays to God on behalf of his wife, Rebekah. And the Lord heard his prayer, and his wife, Rebekah, conceived. But the children inside Rebekah struggled with each other, and she said, why is this happening to me? She's calling out to God, why is this happening to me? So Rebekah went to inquire of the Lord, and he declared to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So God is saying the older will serve the younger, and later on Rebekah is trying to help this along, right? If you want to bring out your smartphones, here's a QR code of 2 babies who are fighting in utero. If you wanted to see that sort of thing, I'll give you a second to pull that out as I get a drink of water. So you can see 2 babies who are tussling in the womb, which is actually a very scary situation. Depending on the tussling, what happens with the umbilical cord, right? it could get wrapped around one of their necks. So it's a scary situation. So understandably, Rebecca is concerned about all the jostling and wrestling and fighting inside of her womb. She's concerned about this. What's happening here? And God says, don't worry, there will be two, but the older will serve the younger. So here we are, is an updated genogram. And down here we have the two new ones, Esau and Jacob. We know Esau is the older one. Jacob is the younger twin. We know that this is the way Rebecca would prepare breakfast for her sons. Jacob on the left, you have the smoothie and the bear-shaped sandwich and all the berries. And the right-hand side, Esau will get the leftovers. Because we know Rebecca had her favorite son, Jacob, right? And we know that Isaac has his favorite son, Esau, right? When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home amongst the tents. Because Isaac had a taste for wild game, he loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So each parent has their favorite son. You know who else in the story was a really good hunter? Ishmael was a really good hunter. And it wasn't Isaac's choice to send his brother away. It was one of his parents' choice, right? And I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if his distance from his biological brother, half-brother, who's a good hunter, and he sees some of these same characteristics in Esau, I wonder if he's like, oh, that's nice. Someone else who knows how to hunt, and maybe naturally was gravitating towards him, potentially, because that reminded him of his brother. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do therapy with these two brothers to try and help them get along. I'm glad I'm not doing that, but I sometimes wonder about that. And there's this story of Esau going out to hunt, and he comes home and he's famished. And he is so hungry, right? And he comes in and he smells the lasagna coming from the oven. And he wants some lasagna. Please, give me some lasagna. But Jacob says, swear to me first. Swear to me first, Jacob said. So Esau swore to Jacob and sold him the birthright. Jacob is charging his brother birthright just to have a piece of lasagna. So Jacob gave some bread and lentil stew, the lasagna, and the garlic bread to Esau, who ate and drank and then got up and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. And oftentimes this story is used as a critique against Esau. Esau, me go hunt, me eat food, me want food to eat. As he sees this ape of the man, as if he doesn't think about his consequences. He's not thinking logically. But I think this story is actually more of a critique on Jacob than Esau. Here's why. Back then, you didn't have McDonald's and Taco Bells, right? If McDonald's or Taco Bell, you didn't have Denny's or Sherry's. You didn't have places like restaurants all around. If you were going to travel, you had to bring your own food or rely on the hospitality of other people. Early in the story, in Genesis 18, God and the two others come to Abraham, and Abraham runs out to greet them to show his hospitality. Come here, let me take care of you, right? In contrast, we have a brother, a family member, returning home from the hunt, famished, hungry, and Jacob is charging his brother an exorbitant price. Back then, you did not open up a can of Chef Boyardee. You did not open up a can of tomato soup. If you're going to make soup, you make soup in a pot, right? So either this soup is for everyone else at camp and they have already eaten, and Esau is going to get the leftovers, or people are eating currently and he comes to join, or maybe he's the first one because he smells the garlic bread and the lasagna in the oven, and he just wants one piece, and there's this big pan of lasagna, boom, that Jacob brings out, and Jacob says, no food for you unless you give me your birthright. That is not hospitality. That is not how you treat family. That is not how you should treat your brother. So what does this birthright mean? Like, how do we understand this birthright? On the left-hand side, we have a situation where we have 10 sons. And I had some great apple pie tonight. So this big piece of this pie, this blue piece, the firstborn son gets his birthright, which is one piece, and then 1/10 of everything that's left. And all the other brothers get 1/10. If there's just two brothers in the family, like Esau and Jacob, Esau, who's the eldest son by a few minutes, he gets his birthright, then half of what's left. So basically, Esau gets 2/3 of dad's inheritance, and Jacob only gets 1/3. And Jacob is saying, you can't have this piece of lasagna and garlic bread unless you give me your birthright, so I will have 2/3 of Dad's inheritance. That's a big number. Abraham is a wealthy individual, right? That's a lot of goat and cattle and sheep and material in exchange for one little piece of lasagna. Who does that to other family members? This gives us a little clue into what Jacob is about. He's about trying to get things for himself. In fact, you remember this story in Genesis 27, Jacob deceives his father. Rebekah in the background is the puppet master trying to manipulate these things. And when Jacob comes to try and deceive his father, we get the sense, doesn't really trust what's happening. Are you really Esau? Come here, come close to me. Let me smell you, let me touch you. Because he does not trust his senses. Something seems off here. But when he finally smelled his garments and touched the back of his neck, right, where they had the goat hair on his hands, on his wrists, he finally said, okay, I will bless you. And this deception of his father had major consequences for this family. What's happened now is not only does Jacob have the birthright because he swindled his brother for one piece of lasagna, but now he has the blessing. So for all intents and purposes, he is now the acting firstborn son of the family because he has the birthright and the blessing. And then Rebekah says, hey, your brother's going to kill you. You better run out of town. And that's the last time Rebekah ever sees her favorite son because he spends many years over there. He never gets to see his mother ever again. And this blessing that Isaac was trying to give Esau, that he inadvertently gave to Isaac, included this element of fertility because God is going to bless him and bless this family. So here's the genogram again. So we have Esau, who married 3 women. Jacob runs away to Laban's family, and Laban is the brother of his mother, Rebekah. And he runs over here, and Laban also takes advantage of him, right? Take advantage of him. So Jacob runs back up here to Padamaran, where his grandparents had come from previously, because remember Abraham and Sarah came from Ur up to Padamaran, down to the wild, wild west. And Jacob is backtracking. He's going back up north to try and go to his mother's family to try and find someone who will be a suitable wife for him. Jacob meets tender-eyed Leah, but he sees Rachel and he loves Rachel. It's clear that he has a strong preference for Rachel and not so much interested in Leah, correct? So let's look at how long he works, how much he labors for Laban to marry one of his daughters. So he works 7 years for Rachel, right? 7 years. And then on the wedding night, there's a swapperoo, right? And lo and behold, he's not marrying Rachel, he's marrying Leah. And he finds out about it. He talks to Laban, complains about it. Laban says, okay. Let her have 1 week as your wife. Then I'll let you marry Rachel, but you have to work another 7 years for her. So he gets married to Leah. There's 1 bridal week. He gets married to Rachel, so 7 days after he gets married to Leah. And then he works 7 more years for Rachel. So how many years did he work for Rachel? 14. And how many years did he work for Leah? None. He worked for Rachel, got tricked, and decided, I'm going to keep working for Rachel because she's worth it. I'll work 14 years for Rachel, 0 years for Leah. I never wanted Leah. And that's clear there's this tension between these sisters and how it plays out in the family. In fact, there's a lot of lying going on in the story. Abraham lies to Pharaoh, saying, this is my sibling, not my wife. Why? To save his own skin. Later on, Abraham lies to Abimelech during the second famine. Oh, this is my sibling, my sister. Why? To save his own skin, right? If it's good for the goose, then it might be good for the gander. Isaac, later on, lies to the second king Abimelech when he says, hey, Rebekah, will you please pretend to be my sister? Why? Me too, this is my sibling, to save his own skin. What's interesting is, later on, Jacob, who's prompted by Rebekah, lies to his father Isaac, says, I am my sibling Esau, and here is my skin. And using the same exact playbook that Rebekah had, Laban seems to have access to that because Leah, prompted by Laban on the wedding night, says to Jacob, me too, I am my sibling, Rachel, and here is my skin. So in this family, who you are related to is very important, and who you are partnered with is also very important. So siblingship is important in this family. But God still blessed tender-eyed Leah. In fact, she had more success when it came to fertility for having children. The first 3 sons are all about her lack of love that she's experiencing from her husband, hoping that she'll get love from her and attention from her husband. And finally, when it comes to Judah, she says, this time I will praise the Lord. And her other sons are more related to her own happiness and her connection with God, where the first 3 are all bemoaning and getting upset about the fact that her husband does not love her. In Genesis 30, there's infertility wars, and there's this story. It says, now in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But he said to her, is it a small matter for you to take my husband? Would you take my son's mandrakes also? So Rachel said, therefore he, that's the husband, that's Jacob, may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. What's a mandrake? Does anyone know? It's a plant, yes. Good. I heard a plant.
It's an aphrodisiac.
Oh, look at this. It's an aphrodisiac. That's right. In fact, this is really important, right? This is really important if we're thinking about infertility, if we're thinking about how do we handle this. These are mandrakes. A little bulbous here. This is a flower. But more importantly, look at the roots. See, the roots can be fairly anthropomorphic. Imagine you're digging these out of the ground, and out of the ground comes this little root that has 2 arms and 2 legs, right? So it's not that far of a stretch to understand why people in the ancient Near East thought of these as potential amulets to ward away evil spirits, potential amulets to bring you good luck. And this was also an aphrodisiac. You could take the roots, you could grind it up and put it in hot water for tea to help you become pregnant. So these mandrakes were important. And so what's happening is Rachel wants access to these infertility drugs, right? But Leah says, I'm not going to give them to you because I don't have access to my husband. So Rachel says, I will give you my husband for one night in exchange for these drugs. There's a transaction of access to a husband for drugs in this family. That seems pretty challenging in my opinion about how people are interacting with one another. Furthermore, these drugs are actually deliriant, hallucinogenic, tropane alkaloids. So they're not just drugs, they're drugs. So in some ways, to put it coarsely, Rachel is pimping out her husband for drugs because she wants to get pregnant so bad. So she will do anything, even selling her husband's body in exchange for getting drugs to help her get pregnant. There's this Pashto proverb saying, I was swift in my revenge. I only waited 100 years. Because later on in the story, we know that Jacob and Rachel and Leah, they're going to be returning back to Canaan. And the question is, how is Esau going to receive them? Esau swore he was going to kill his brother. What's going to happen now? And I think one of the big questions we're thinking about how to make sure the family is safe. We'll move on because of time. Genesis 31, Dinah, Leah and Jacob's daughter, was sexually assaulted. Levi and Simeon get revenge upon Shechem, and Jacob is passive but upset about this. So what happens is Dinah is taken by the prince of Shechem, and she's sexually assaulted, and then this prince comes and says, can I please marry her? And these 2 sons, Levi and Simeon, say, you can marry her, but everyone has to get circumcised, all the males. And the prince says, done, deal. Circumcise everybody, and while they're circumcised, as they're healing, Levi and Simeon come in with swords and they kill everybody. This is the retribution of this family. And in verse 30, Jacob is really upset about this. And he says to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble upon me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people of this land. We are few, that's our family, few in number. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. He's really interested in his own well-being, not his family's well-being, but his own well-being. Verse 31, but they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? So these sons are actually challenging their father, saying, look, it's not okay for you to only think about your own well-being. You have to think about your family's well-being. So what is Jacob all about? Is he interested in preserving his family? Or is he interested in preserving his own skin? Is he selfish, or is he trying to help other people? Genesis 35, Jacob takes and buries the family idols. Rachel dies as Benjamin is born. Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, that's the handmaid of Rachel, basically saying, I'm going to sleep with handmaid of Rachel, your favorite wife, and you're not going to do anything about it. He's challenging his father's right to lead the family, and Jacob doesn't do anything about it. Jacob is renamed the second time Israel. The first time he wrestled with God, and now God is reminding him again, hey, look, you're the one who wrestled with God. Let's stand up for something. Genesis 35, Esau's descendants are mentioned. And then in Genesis 37, Joseph dreams, and the brothers scheme. So here we are, we're expanding this genogram, and there are many sons down here. I did not want to put 12 squares. I just put the squares between where the biological mothers are with Jacob. So we have Gad and Asher, which are the two sons of Zilpah. Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin, and Bilhah has Dan and Naphtali. So we have all these sons here. And here's Joseph with his special coat, because his brothers did not get the same sort of coat, did not get the same sort of treatment from their father, right? It's very clear that Joseph was treated differently, and he was different. Let's look at all the ways that he is different in this family. Joseph is different from his brothers in a few ways. In fact, he's so different that in Genesis 37 it says, his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. They would not sit next to him during Thanksgiving. They would not come over and exchange presents with him during Christmas. They hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Within this family, that's emotional cutoff. We know that Joseph is a tattletale. Genesis 37, he brought a bad report of his brothers to his father. You don't do that. You don't snitch on your siblings. That's one reason the siblings did not like him. He is clearly Israel's favorite because Jacob loved Joseph. He is the favorite son because he's Rachel's son, and Rachel is a much preferred wife of Jacob, right? Not Leah's son, but Rachel's son. He is gifted this coat of many colors, or this royal coat. He is not assigned the same labor responsibilities as his brother. If you remember the story, Joseph is relaxing at home watching TV while his brothers are out shepherding, and his dad says, how about you go check on them? And he goes on this journey to check on them, and that's when they take his coat. So he's just relaxing at home while they have, the grunt work of going out and taking care of the sheep. He doesn't have to do that. He's chilling at home. He has dreams of his family and brothers bowing down to him, and he shares those dreams twice. This would be a hard brother to live with, right? He has special treatment, special clothes, different labor responsibilities, and he dreams of people bowing down to him. I would also not want to necessarily speak to him on friendly terms, right? He's a difficult person to get along with in this family. So what the brothers could have decided to try and work this out and have a conversation with him, with the father, have a family powwow, have a family meeting to resolve this conflict. Instead, they take their brother, throw him down to a pit. Then they see some traveling family members, extended family members, and they rip up his coat and they sell him. They turn a profit, making money off him, turning him to a slave as he goes down to Egypt. So again, this family is headed down to Egypt, whether they like it or not, right? Some family members are always going down to Egypt. Genesis 38, we have Judah and Tamar, this little interlude. Genesis 39, Joseph prospers in Egypt, then he's imprisoned. Genesis 40, the dreamer becomes the interpreter. Genesis 41, Joseph becomes the viceroy of Egypt, the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, and he stores the food, getting ready for this coming famine. Genesis 42 through 45, there is this prejudice and discrimination that might be experienced by these brothers. So what's happening is there's another big famine in the land, and these brothers of Joseph come down to Egypt to get some food, right? This family's always trying to figure out, how do we get more food when there's a famine? And they come down, and they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. Remember this story? Yeah. So when they come in, he seems to have prescient knowledge of what's going on. He asks them very specific questions, and accuses them of being spies, and he throws them all in prison. You must be spies, throws them all in prison. And they say, no, we're not spies. We promise we came to just buy some food. We're not spying on the country. He says, okay, I'll keep Simeon hostage, and you can go back home with the food, but don't you come back unless you bring this youngest son you talk about, whatever his name is, Benjamin. You can't come back here for more food unless you bring Benjamin with you. Well, As they're going back home, they realize the money they brought to pay for the food is back in the sacks. So it's going to look like they have the food and stole the money back. Ooh, so they go back home. It's a long famine, right? They run out of food again. So Israel says, you have to go down and get some more food from Egypt. And their brothers say, we can't go down unless we take Benjamin. So the father now has a difficult choice to make. Do I send this last son of my favorite wife down to Egypt, where they were already accused of being spies once, and they took the food and the money back with them, so they look like they're thieves as well? Do I send them back down, or do I let my family starve? He ends up sending these brothers and Benjamin back down there. And when they come down there with Benjamin, Joseph sees them, and he seats them in birth order around the table, and they are amazed at this, and he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food portions compared to everybody else, and these brothers are amazed that this is happening. How does Joseph know this special information? He must have some sort of magical way of finding this out. So they get their food, they go back home, and on their way back home, Joseph sends his servant, says, run after them and stop them. The servant rides after them, stops them, says, whoa, hold on a second. We know you might be spies, and somebody stole the divination cup. Somebody stole Joseph's divination cup. And all the brothers say, not me. We didn't do it. You can look on all of our packs. So the servant looks in all the packs of food, finally gets to Benjamin's pack of food, opens it up, and lo and behold, he brings out the divination cup. At this point in time, the brothers could have made a choice. They could have said, well, Benjamin, you got sticky fingers. You shouldn't have taken the cup. Now you have to stay in Egypt, and we're going to go back to Dad. Because that's basically what they did with Joseph, right? They got rid of Joseph, sent him down to Egypt. This is a sweet, sweet story, a sweet, sweet alibi, a sweet, sweet way to get rid of Benjamin from the family. They already got rid of Joseph. Now they can get rid of Benjamin. This is just offered to them on a platter. Instead, the brothers tear their clothes in grief. And we've been waiting several chapters for this to happen. Because when they tore Joseph's cloak and put blood on it and brought that cloak as evidence to their father that Joseph has died, their father tore his clothes. And now finally, these other brothers are tearing their clothes at the idea of Benjamin being taken away from them. This is what I think Joseph is doing. He's testing the family system. How does this family deal with people that they may not like? Do they get rid of them? How does this family deal with Benjamin, who is the son of the preferred wife who's no longer there? Are they trying to get rid of him, or are they trying to protect him? Because they're trying to get rid of him, Benjamin will go back down to Egypt, and he can live with Joseph. If they're trying to protect him, he will know, because all these brothers will say, you can't take Benjamin alone, you're taking all of us. So they all go back down to Egypt. Joseph is testing the family system to see, is this family still divided, or are we united? So, what are some of the family rules? What were some of the intergenerational patterns of behavior? What are the patterns that are passed down from generation to generation? How do people handle anxiety and tension in the family? Who are the villains? Who are the heroes? Here we go. We're going to use a genogram to try and answer these questions. Here's the simplified genogram. I've taken out Lot, because taking out that top row, so we just have Abraham down to the 4 generations. Let's look at the first thing, defiance. These individuals with the red dotted line around them and the capital D, these individuals are defiant in the family. Hagar, Ishmael, Esau, the sons of Leah, and Zilpah. Here are the liars in the family. All the purple liars. These are the individuals who lied. Abram, Sarai, Isaac, Rebekah, Laban, Jacob, Rachel, all the sons down. So we have defiance and liars. Here's people who have conflict in the family. In every single generation, there's conflict between the siblings. In every generation, there's conflict between the parents. Favoritism. In every single generation, there is one parent who favors the youngest child in every single generation. In every generation, there's extreme manipulation amongst these individuals. Extreme manipulation, whether it's pulling strings in the background or trying to force someone to do something they don't want to do, making an unfair trade, not being hospitable, et cetera, taking advantage of their brother, selling their brother for a profit. And every generation, there's some sort of adoption. There's Lot. Benjamin, in some ways, was adopted back into the family because his mother passed away. Then later on in the story, we'll see that Ephraim and Manasseh were also adopted. You could even say that God adopted Abraham into his own family. In every generation, someone is cut off. Either they run away or they are kicked out of the family. Hagar runs away from Sarah. God tells her to go back. And then Hagar is kicked out by Sarah. Hagar and Ishmael are kicked out. We know that Jacob runs away from Esau. Then he runs away from Laban. And then Joseph is kicked out from his family and sold to extended family members. So in every generation, somebody is kicked out or runs away from the family. And I wonder if Abram was running from something. I wonder if he was running from infertility, trying to find some sort of way for his family to grow. There's this unrepaired rift between the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael. And we talked about this before, the millennia ripple effect from that decision we still experience today. So, who are the villains in the story? Someone help me out. Everybody. Oh, what do you mean by everybody? They all had something going on. Right. Any specific villains? What? Abraham, but he's supposed to be the big patriarch of the family. How can the patriarch also be a villain? He was a liar. Okay. So what does it take to make someone a villain? What? We don't know the full story, right? We know some pictures, a little glimpse of the story. We don't know the full story. Good. What are some other bad villains in the family? Anyone else? Sarah. Why Sarah?
She thought about herself and caused lies and family discord.
But Abraham was standing right there. He could have done something about it. He went along with it. In some ways, he's an accomplice to this, right? Okay. Who else might be a villain? Jacob. How could Jacob be a villain? Isn't he he was renamed Israel? How could Jacob be a villain? He was a big liar. Manipulated, taking advantage of people, right? Right? Okay. Laban's a villain. How about these sons of Leah? Who takes their brother, sells them as a slave to make a profit? But here's the thing. Those bad boys, those bad villains, the sons of Leah who should not do that, they were actually following the family rules that were taught to them, right? They were deceitful. They were lying. They were taking advantage of the situation. They were tricking their father. They were turning a profit. So in some ways, they were really good family members, right? They were following the family rules, right? They were following the family rules of Abraham's family mafia, right? So they were really good family members in some ways. Okay. Couple things. One, in every generation, there's conflict within the marital unit. In every generation, the younger son actually receives the blessing. In every generation, there's conflict between the siblings, sometimes big conflict, threatening to kill someone or kicking someone out. And one of the major rules seems to be, do whatever is expedient and good for you now, and not worried about the consequences that might come from this. What is expedient and helpful for you right now? Whatever we refuse to acknowledge, we will undoubtedly and unconsciously pass on to others. We also come from families that have patterns. There's a chance we picked up a few things along the way that aren't so pretty. There's a chance that the way we resolve conflict causes more problems because we have difficulty resolving that tension and anxiety we have with other people in our family. Let's look at what's happening to life satisfaction with these patriarchs. Genesis 25, verse 7 says, "These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people." That's Abraham. Let's look at Isaac. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Then Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. What's missing here? Yeah, not satisfied with life. Let's look at the next generation. Genesis 47, this is when Jacob is talking to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is asking him about his life. And Jacob says, "The years of my living abroad are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life." So life satisfaction changed for each generation. Do we see that? Here's what's happening. When we have anxiety, unresolved tension in our family of origin, if we don't resolve that tension, that anxiety and tension are passed down to the next generation. And just because someone passes away, is kicked out of the family, or moves away, does not mean that that anxiety and tension suddenly disappears. It just gets redistributed amongst the rest of the remaining family members. So this anxiety, this old anxiety, is passed down from generation to generation to generation, which means a lot of the anxiety we experience might be old. It might not even be ours. We inherited it from our parents. It's passed down to us. Too many people spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of good ancestors. The responsibility of each generation is not to please their predecessors, it's to improve things for their offspring. It's more important to make your children proud than your parents proud. In Genesis 48, there's this beautiful story of Jacob being told that Joseph is coming, and he's told, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you." Israel collected his strength, and he sat up in bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous,' family, 'and I will make you a multitude of people,' family, 'and I will give you this land to your descendants,' land and family, remembering what God has promised him, 'after you for everlasting possessions.' Now your two sons," he's talking to Joseph, he says, "your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before me, those are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh are mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." He's saying, I am adopting your two sons. These two sons are now my sons, at the same level as Reuben and Simeon. But your children that you have fathered after them will be yours, and they shall be called by the names of your brothers and their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Padamaran, Rachel died to my sorrow, in the land of Canaan on the journey. There was still some distance to go to Ephrath. I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So he's saying, I'm going to adopt these two children, and then he talks about losing his favored wife. And I'm wondering if he's adopting these two children because he knew that his two wives, Leah and Rachel, were having these infertility wars. Who can bear the most children? And he's adopting these two sons that are coming from the line of Rachel into his family. So in essence, saying, I'm adopting these two sons on Rachel's behalf. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has let me see you and your children as well. So Joseph took them both, Ephraim on his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh on his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand, his left hand, and he crossed his hands. He's crossing his hands so that he can bless the younger son, not the older son. And Joseph is upset with this. He does not like this. When Joseph saw his father place his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to move it. No, Dad, you're confused. Let me put on the right child. And Israel says, no. That's not what's happening. I know, my son, I know. For he will also become a people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. What's happening here, Joseph is upset that his father is not blessing the right son. But his father is blessing the youngest son on purpose. Imagine if this solution had been applied the previous generation, with Isaac sending out Esau to get some game to come back, and Esau comes to the tent, and instead of Jacob tricking his father invites Jacob also into the tent, crosses his hands, and blesses Jacob instead of Esau. If that would have happened, the family would have never split apart. They would have never had to separate. But in different generations, because of the decisions the families have made, the families can't resolve that conflict, and someone has to be kicked out or run away from the family. This family had difficulty handling tension. And if you're like me, my family isn't always the best at handling tension either. Maybe your families have to be very skilled at this, I don't know. But sometimes tension is left unresolved, and unresolved tension will just be passed down and redistributed amongst the rest of the remaining family members. Okay, closing theological reflections, then we'll get some feedback from you. First, God chose to make and remake his covenant with this family. Would you like to invite this family over for Thanksgiving dinner? Would you like this dysfunctional family in your home causing a ruckus? God chose to make and remake his covenant with these people, imperfect people, coming from imperfect families. People seem to work really, really hard, even taking advantage of other family members, to obtain or protect what God has already promised them. In some ways, they end up putting those promises in jeopardy, like Jacob running away from Canaan, where God had promised he would be able to inherit. He runs away up north because he's trying to get away from his brother. People are really upset and don't know how to handle tension in this family. But God works even harder to not let our dysfunction ruin his covenant. It's righteousness by faith, not on our own family strengths or on our own actions. It's righteousness by faith, covenant based on God, not on humanity, right? Thankful for that, because look at this family. But God does not give up on this family. Each generation, he tries to remake his covenant with them. He's not afraid of our dysfunction. Even though there's a discrepancy, there's a tension between God's loyalty compared to Abraham's family loyalty. We see how loyal their family members are to each other. And in contrast, God is loyal to the family, even when they are not loyal to each other. And sometimes the action of one person can change the family tree. Joseph was sent out of town, right? But because he got clear of that toxicity of that family system, in some ways, he was able to grow and flourish. He experienced some hard times, but he was able to grow and flourish outside of that toxic family system. And in doing so, through him, God saved thousands, maybe millions of people within that region, right? As he prepared for the famine, and because he had all the storehouse of food, when the famine came, he saved his family, and other people are also living around him. God can make changes in just one person. That one person can change the family tree. Often, we're not getting out of dysfunctional emotional or behavior patterns until we get clear of the toxic systems, families, organizations, churches, relationships, in which we're enmeshed. It's hard to heal when the relational oxygen we're breathing every day is polluted. Sometimes we need space. I'm not saying you need to cut off your family, but just want to recognize sometimes a little distance to help you heal, then you can return back to your family. That can be helpful. Jeremiah 31:29, in those days they will not say again, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. All right, let's get the roaming microphone here. What are some stuff that you noticed in Abraham's family that I missed, that I didn't talk about? Some patterns you noticed that I missed? How might this genogram journey through Abraham's family, how might this change the way you see Abraham's family? Or how might this change the way you see your family or romantic relationships? So what's something that I missed that you noticed? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family? How might this change the way you see your own relationship with your own family? I'm interested to hear some of the feedback, some of the observations. There's a hand back there.
You did bring up the fact that Hagar made fun of Sarah and Isaac.
I don't remember that. I know she lorded it over her, right? But we don't know if that's a passive or an active. And she's the maidservant. She has less power, right? She is told what to do with her body. This is not a volunteer situation. She was voluntold to do this, right?
I understand that she was making fun and pointing fingers and all that at Isaac.
Does the Bible say she was pointing fingers?
I think it does, somewhere in there. Maybe it's all my...
Let's look after. Let's see if it says. After this, let's talk. Let's look at it, see if she was actually pointing fingers. Maybe that's the case. Maybe I missed that. Okay, let's hold on. Let's bookmark that. Thank you. Good. What else did I miss? Yes, down here.
When you were talking about Joseph and his brothers in Egypt, you didn't share that the one chose to stay. Simeon
volunteered.
He volunteered, showing that there had been growth in the family.
Yes. Yes. One person was willing to sacrifice potentially their life, right? So the rest of us could return back home with the food, right? So here's someone coming from a father who's really selfish, trying to save his own skin. Someone saying, you know what, I'm willing to sacrifice my own skin so the rest of my family can have food. Good, good. Hand back here.
Wasn't he also the same brother that talked the other brothers into not killing?
I think that was Reuben who was trying to do that.
Okay.
Reuben tried to protect Joseph, and then he walked away, and while Reuben was gone,
They sold him.
wanted to kill him. But there's a change in heart in Simeon, right? Something has happened between these different chapters. Good. Good. What else? How does this change the way you see Abraham's family? How does it change the way you see your own family?
My family looks pretty tame.
Okay. Okay.
Compared
Your family's
to
been
Abraham.
baptized. Okay.
But, you know, I've lived long enough to see the family dynamics in not just my own family and see how it passes from generation to generation. So that's kind of startling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sobering too, right?
I think for me, I think that it is totally what. Okay. I think for me, what I think I see is that God can use flawed people, and I think you've already said that. But that even though they are really have lots of warts, that He still wants to work with them.
It's not just flawed people, but flawed systems, flawed families, right? He's not scared by that. Where that might give us pause. Like, ooh, I don't know if I want you coming over for Thanksgiving if your family's coming with you. I don't know about that. Good. What else?
There's an element here that's hard to grasp, which is judge not, lest you be judged. I've encountered that a few times, and when you suspend judgment, it allows you to see situations differently. Mm-hmm. I guess one of our pastors here for a number of years taught me one thing. He said, you need to stay in the conversation long enough with people to hear their story. And when you hear their story, that changes everything.
But it's hard to hear their story if you've already formed an opinion of them, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Good. Anyone else? Over here.
You're looking for Genesis 21:9.
21:9. Surprised you know what I was looking for. Let's see. 21. Okay, so here's the story of Hagar, Ishmael sent away. The child grew and was weaned, that's Isaac. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast, but Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, was born to Abraham, was mocking. So what happened, Ishmael was Isaacing Isaac. So the word mock is the same root word as Isaac, which means laughter. So Ishmael was teasing Isaac, was Isaacing Isaac. And when Sarah saw this, she said, we can't have this in our family, no teasing. Have you ever teased your sibling? She said, no teasing in our family, get this son out, right? That was her response to this. Yes. Oh, there's a hand back over here.
Not Isaiah. Genesis 16:4 also says that Hagar mocked or whatever.
So Genesis 16:4, so that's Abraham slept with Hagar and she conceived. And when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. The language here is changing the hierarchy, seeing her status differently than her owner, than her mistress, Sarai. So that power imbalance, Sarai was uncomfortable with, right? And so she started to mistreat Hagar because of that. And because of that mistreatment, Hagar ran away. Mm-hmm.
You don't think Hagar was mistreating her, and that's why she left because
No, I think it's pretty clear the person who has the most power right now is Sarah. And Sarah is doing the mistreatment. She has all the power. Hagar does not. She was voluntold to do this, and now she's becoming maybe more uppity, but Sarah has all the power, and she's abusing that power to mistreat the person who is now carrying her baby, at least her idea. There's been a big change of heart in Sarah. And Abraham isn't really stepping in to stop this, right? He's not stepping in to protect, unfortunately. I think we can all agree that this family made some decisions based off of their anxiety. How do I handle this tension? What do I do when someone's teasing? What do I do? How do I get a leg up over my brother? How do I make sure that I get something, get what's for me? How do I do something that's expedient for my own well-being? And when this happens, this family struggles. In our own family, if we do whatever's expedient, whatever's good for me, our family will probably also struggle, right? As a family, we have to decide, are we going to take care of each other, or are we only going to take care of me? Your perspective on your family, your perspective on the tension definitely changes the way you and other people experience the family. I'm happy to stay around and talk some more, answer more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. So let's pray, and we'll be done. Father God, I'm so thankful that you are not scared of, or you can't handle, or you're not interested in people who are flawed or families who struggle. You are a good God. You are the Father of lights. You give good gift to your children. You are so gracious and loyal and kind, our Creator, our King, and we desperately need to be more like you. I pray you give us the patience to deal with our own families. I pray you give us the wisdom to deal with our own families. I pray you give us the courage to look at our own behavior and see it as part of patterns that we learn from our family, to give us the courage and the wisdom and the direction to change our own behavior so we can reflect who we truly are, children of God, ambassadors for Christ. I thank you for being with us tonight, and I pray you be with us as we move into your Sabbath. Amen.